just quick description, I'm going to be using UL's risk assessment. I don't know if you guys know UL is kind of also become a safety company now, like outside of their normal role. And they actually have a decent webinar. I've got a link down there, a little bit technical, but good to forward to clients if you're interested. But when we're looking at a risk assessment like this, I just want to point out a few things that I see overlooked as people do these, when they do them, which they don't always. One is this kind of like part at the top, right? And it's so easy to think like, oh, it's like middle school and I'm taking a quiz and I'm going to put my name at the top and be done with it. But this is something that is, I would argue, sometimes the most important part of a risk assessment that never gets any attention. And so there's a few things. One, figuring out what the piece of machinery is. That sounds so obvious, I know. I was giving a workshop recently at the UCSD OSHA Training Center, and I was working with a lady that's been in this industry for a long time, and she works at a Navy base, and her fundamental job is helping with safety in machine shops. And we were, I brought in equipment, we were doing kind of like mock risk assessments, and was really she was not understanding, and I was having trouble figuring out why. And I finally realized why. She was applying trying to apply the bandsaw requirements to a bench grinder. And so this was someone, their role is safety, but they weren't even sure what piece of equipment it was. And that's something that's not as uncommon as you'd think. And so this is where kind of knowing what that equipment is, and also having people on the team that have that diversity, right? You have someone that knows the safety, also somebody that knows the machinery and the use cases and how it gets used in that business. Again, sounds obvious, but I find a lot of the time this is one person doing a run through that doesn't involve other people. And so this is also, as insurance people, if you're looking through binders, is a good thing to check. You can like, oh, is it the same name on the top of every risk assessment with no one else mentioned? That's interesting. Now, other piece just is location. So again, people think that's trivial. They'll say building 5, right? That doesn't mean anything. And this was kind of a big deal for me when I was visiting a client, an aerospace customer. And there was a few things going on with them, but one of them was they had we walk into their facility through the loading dock, and I say, oh, that's a huge disander. What do you guys use that for? And he said, oh, we haven't used that thing in years. Like, oh, okay, keep walking through. And on my way out, exiting the building, I saw somebody using the disander in a way they shouldn't have been, but they're also using it in the thoroughfare of the loading dock. So people are walking right behind them, carrying boxes, limited visibility, and that is a very significant part of that hazard there, because someone can get bumped into it, and that location is a big part of that risk assessment. And it's one of those things, again, where really being specific can be really helpful. Then, of course, the job hazard analysis. We're going to go into this, some specific hazards that we see overlooked often. But this is, again, where that other person on the team matters. So depending on the workplace, their communication between the safety side and production side may be great, maybe non-existent. It's kind of all over the board. So really making sure that whoever's conducting the risk assessment is aware of the things being done, as well as, excuse me, as well as the kind of related hazards. So another just quick example is in that same customer, they thought that machine wasn't even being used, and one of its primary uses was for grinding the heads of nails off for the people taking pallets apart. Not what you should be using a disc sander for, right? But nobody knew that until they started asking around. So again, it's one of those things where it seems obvious, but it's one of the things I often see a gap in. And since you guys are more technical, I'm not going to dive into this part, but just this kind of represents the transition from avoiding all injury to numerical risk profiles. And I know not everybody agrees with that kind of conceptually, but that is where all the standards have gone. And so the part of this I will call out is that when we're doing these assessments and putting in the numbers, doing the calculation, there are a number of different standards you can use. I'd have to look up which one UL uses. But the thing I've seen OSHA inspectors get stuck on is they'll see something like this and they'll be like, okay, I see a 3, an 8, a 5, a 1. What's your risk threshold as a business? And people say, whoa, 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 what do you mean? And that what OSHA often expects is that you actually have a number that's written down somewhere that says, hey, you know, anytime we see over a 7, we as a business are going to mitigate and try and bring it below a 7, right? And obviously, if you chose a 17, that's not going to work. But businesses are able to kind of set their threshold of what is a quote unquote acceptable risk. Conceptually, you might disagree with that, but that's what I've seen in practice. And then lastly, we all know about hierarchy of controls. But the thing that I often see missed is people don't actually inspect and follow up on safeguards. So whether it's something that's being done in-house, right? You've recognized a bunch of hazards, you've recommended some mitigations for them, and no one actually checked, did the safety professionals request at the very beginning that, you know, went through purchasing, turned into a quote, went out to vendors, got work done, came back, got installed by someone, is it still what they expected? Does it actually reduce the risk? And are you there signing off as the safety professional saying it did? Because if you don't do that, the entire rest of the process is useless from a kind of a liability perspective, because no one actually confirmed that any of it worked. And as you kind of dig into complexity on these safeguard systems, it is a surprising amount of like if this then that checks, especially if you're in the functional safety realm. So again, one of those things where you want to make sure things are kind of getting checked off at the end. And of course, then part of that is saying, yes, and now there is no longer a hazard, or the hazard is significantly reduced. So that was just a fast forward through a couple things of risk assessments. What we're going to be spending most of today on is a few things I see overlooked on the hazard analysis side, the more practical side, and then how to kind of select these mitigations. And